Okay, so you're ready to go deep, right?
Yeah.
You want to really understand how these big societal structures work, these institutions, how power really plays out in the world.
Yeah, and to get a real grip on those things, we got to wrestle with some thought-provoking ideas, for sure.
And that's why we're diving into the work of Theodor W. Adorno today.
And what's really fascinating about Adorno is that he gives us this lens for critical analysis. He was a major philosopher and sociologist in the 20th century, and he didn't shy away from challenging the way things were.
I think when people hear philosophy, their eyes kind of glaze over.
Yeah.
But Adorno's work is anything but abstract or irrelevant. He was super engaged with the real world and those forces that shape it.
And plus, he was also like a central figure in the Frankfurt School.
Yes.
That group of thinkers known for their sharp critiques of society and culture.
The Frankfurt School was all about going deeper. Looking beyond those narratives, we're told to uncover how power dynamics really work. And Adorno's work fits right in with that, with his focus on how even things that seem kind of normal in culture can be used for social control. Before we go too deep into his theories, let's get a sense of the man himself. Who was this guy, Theodor W. Adorno?
So he was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1903 to a Jewish family.
Okay.
Imagine growing up, seeing the rise of fascism firsthand, and then experiencing the horrors of the Holocaust. I mean, those events really shaped his worldview and his critical perspective on power structure.
That makes sense. It makes sense why he was so skeptical of these systems of power and how easily they're used to manipulate and oppress people.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of all of that, he was forced to flee Nazi Germany. He ended up in the United States.
Wow.
And that experience of being exiled really solidified his dedication to understanding power structure.
This isn't some armchair intellectual. This is someone whose ideas were formed in the real world.
Exactly. And to add another layer to his development, he was influenced by all sorts of thinkers. Kant, Hegel, Marx, even Freud.
Wow.
And that mix of philosophy, sociology, and psychoanalysis gave him some really powerful tools for understanding society in ways that others just couldn't.
Okay, so he's got this incredible background.
Right.
And then he becomes a key figure in the Frankfurt School.
Right.
Tell me more about the Institute for Social Research, the intellectual home of the Frankfurt School.
Yeah, so the Institute for Social Research, it was founded in Frankfurt in the early 1900s, and it was a real hub for intellectuals who, like Adorno, were totally dedicated to analyzing society and culture. And they weren't just trying to understand how things worked, but they were also asking, why things are the way they are, and who actually benefits from those arrangements.
So it was a place where people could really challenge the accepted wisdom of the day.
Definitely. Adorno joined the Institute in 1933, and he quickly became a leading figure there. He started collaborating with other major thinkers like Max Horkheimer and Walter Benjamin. And, together they really start to develop what we now call critical theory.
And their focus on how capitalism and the media shaped people's perceptions and actually served the people in power. I mean, that's super relevant to what we're talking about right now.
Oh, absolutely. They were really examining how forces that seemed totally neutral, like the media, could be used to control and manipulate people.
Yeah.
Which brings us to one of Adorno's most interesting ideas, the dialectic of enlightenment.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, dialectic of enlightenment sounds a little intimidating to me. Break it down for us. What does it actually mean?
It's a pretty powerful idea. So think about the core goals of the Enlightenment, right? Reason, progress, and individual freedom. Well, Adorno and Horkheimer argued that actually pursuing these goals could lead to new forms of domination.
Wow. So it's kind of like a ladder.
Yeah.
You think it's going to help you climb higher, but the higher you climb, the less stable it becomes.
I like that analogy. That's great. And Adorno and Horkheimer saw this playing out when they were in the United States. They saw how the American dream, while it promises opportunity and freedom, can also lead to conformity consumerism and ultimately a different type of social control.
So even something like the American dream, which seems positive on the surface, can actually be used to create a system of control.
Right.
Whoa, that's wild.
And here's the key takeaway. It's not about rejecting reason or progress entirely, but it's about recognizing that even the best ideas can be twisted and used against us. It's about being aware of how manipulation can happen even in things that seem positive.
This is really starting to connect some dots for me. It's not about just rejecting everything, but it's about developing that critical lens to see how power operates, even in subtle ways.
Exactly.
And this leads us to another big idea from Adorno, one that I think is super relevant today for anyone trying to make sense of the world, the culture industry. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
It sounds ominous.
Well, think about it this way. Every day you're hit with all this stuff. Movies, music, TV shows, social media. We call it mass culture.
Right.
Adorno argued that this isn't just harmless entertainment. It's actually a powerful way to shape how we think what we want, and ultimately how we behave.
Hold on. So you're saying that watching Netflix or scrolling through TikTok is like a form of social control.
Yeah, I mean, think of it like this. Imagine a puppet show where you think you're choosing the story, but the puppeteer is actually controlling everything,
Okay.
behind the scenes.
I see where you're going with this. But how does it actually work? How does the culture industry control us?
Well, Adorno argues that the culture industry creates false needs.
Okay.
It makes us think we need all these products and experiences and lifestyles in order to be happy, when in reality, these things don't actually fulfill us. And the more we chase after these false needs, the more dependent we become on the system that creates them.
Like we're stuck on a treadmill, constantly chasing after the next thing we think we need, but never actually finding what we're really looking for.
Right. And the culture industry also encourages conformity.
Okay.
By giving us all these standardized, easily digestible products, everything's packaged in a way that's super familiar and comfortable, and that discourages us from thinking critically or having our own thoughts.
So instead of, challenging the way things are, we actually reinforce the status quo through all of our consumption habits.
That's what Adorno was worried about. He saw this as a kind of fake rebellion, where we think we're expressing our individuality by following all the trends, but we're actually just playing by the rules of the system.
This is blowing my mind. So if we're living in this world where the culture industry is constantly trying to shape us, how do we even begin to resist it?
That's where Adorno's concept of negative dialectics comes in.
Ooh, another one of those Adorno terms that makes you think, what's negative dialectics all about?
It's Adorno's approach to philosophy. It's a way of challenging how we usually think. Instead of trying to find easy answers and resolutions, negative dialectics is all about contradiction, conflict, and the messiness of reality.
So instead of finding a neat and tidy solution, it's more about accepting that things are complicated and challenging our own assumptions about the world.
You got it. Think about a puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit together. It forces you to think outside the box.
Okay.
Adorno believed that this approach was super important for understanding and critiquing power structures, even the culture industry and the Enlightenment itself.
So negative dialectics is like this mental toolkit for taking apart illusions and seeing how power really works.
Exactly. It's about refusing to accept things at face value and always questioning the narratives that we're given.
I'm seeing how all of this connect. Now, Adorno's personal experiences shaped his critical perspective, his work with the Frankfurt School, his critique of how even the ideals of Enlightenment can be twisted. And now this idea of negative dialectics is a way to challenge the systems that are shaping our lives. Wow, this is a lot to process.
Yeah, we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore in Adorno's work.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we'll keep diving into Adorno's idea. Stay with us.
It's interesting how Adorno's ideas about negative dialectics, connect to that idea of authenticity. Like, he really seemed to believe that living an authentic life meant resisting those pressures to conform to what society expects and finding your own truth,
Right, and we were talking about how the culture industry pushes us towards conformity and consumerism. It seems like those two things are kind of at odds with each other.
That's a great point. Adorno believed that real authenticity comes from looking critically at those external pressures, questioning the narratives and developing a sense of self that isn't based on getting society's approval.
So it's not just about like being yourself, right? It's about being aware of how your desires and values are being shaped by these outside forces, and then making choices about who you really want to be.
Exact. And this whole idea of being aware and making those conscious choices, well, that's where negative dialectics is so useful. It's a way to peel back the layers of illusion and find the truth, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
It sounds like a pretty tough task, though, right? I mean, forces of conformity are super strong, especially with the culture industry constantly bombarding us with messages.
Yeah, it's not easy. Adorno knew how powerful these forces are, especially in what he called the administered world.
Okay, administered world.
Yeah.
Another one of those Adorno terms that makes you think, what did he mean by that?
He was talking about how modern society is becoming more and more organized, controlled, and bureaucratic. Think about all the rules and regulations and systems that govern our lives.
Right.
Adorno was arguing that this leaves very little space for individuality, spontaneity, or real self-expression.
So we're all just cogs in a giant machine, following a script that someone else wrote.
That was his fear. He believed that this administered world, combined with the power of the culture industry, creates a kind of subtle totalitarianism, where people are kind of tricked into conforming even when they think they're making their own choices.
It's kind of creepy when you think about it like that.
Oof.
We think we're in control, but our choices are actually being influenced by all these things we don't even see.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Adorno's work is so relevant even today. I mean, we live in a world that's even more administered and saturated with media than the world he was writing about. So if we want to resist those forces and live authentically, we have to understand how they work.
So how do we do that? How do we cultivate that authentic self in a world that's constantly pressuring us to conform?
Adorno didn't really believe in easy solutions or simple answers. He thought that real resistance begins with critical thinking. It's about questioning those assumptions that we're presented with, being skeptical of easy answers, and really understanding how power works in our society.
So it's about educating ourselves and becoming more aware of the forces that are trying to shape us.
Absolutely. And Adorno believed that art could play a really important role in this process of resistance. He saw art, especially art that challenges conventions and makes us think differently, as a really powerful tool for critique and self-reflection.
Oh, yeah. We haven't talked about Adorno's ideas about art yet. He was a musician himself, wasn't he?
He was, and his background in music really informed his views on aesthetics. Adorno believed that art had this unique ability to hold a mirror up to society, revealing its contradictions and injustices and hidden truths.
So art could be a way of challenging those dominant narratives we talked about.
Exactly. But Adorno was also very critical of what he saw as the commodification of art. The way that the culture industry could take art and turn it into just another product to be consumed, stripping it of its power to challenge and provoke.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Art has the potential to be this amazing force for resistance, but it can also be co-opted by the very forces it's supposed to be challenging.
Right, that's the tension that runs through all of Adorno's aesthetic theory. He believed that real art should be challenging, unsettling, and make you think. It shouldn't just reinforce the status quo or offer easy answers. It should make us uncomfortable and make us question everything we thought we knew.
So Adorno probably wouldn't be a fan of those feel-good Hollywood blockbusters.
Probably not.
Yeah.
He understood that entertainment has its place, but he believed that real art should be more than just a distraction or a way to escape reality. It should make us confront reality in all its complexity and messiness.
I can see why Adorno is considered such a challenging thinker. He's not giving us easy answers or telling us what to think. He's pushing us to think for ourselves, to dig deeper, and to question everything.
That's what makes his work so powerful. It's not a guidebook to happiness or a set of instructions. It's more like a toolkit for dismantling illusions, challenging our assumptions, and seeing the world with fresh eyes.
Okay, I love that toolkit analogy. So we've got negative dialectics for challenging assumptions, authenticity as a way of resisting conformity art, as a potential tool for critique. What else is in this toolkit?
To really grasp Adorno's perspective, we need to talk about his critique of the Enlightenment, which might seem a bit strange, right? We usually think of the Enlightenment as a positive thing in history, all about reason and progress and individual freedom.
Exactly. So why was Adorno critical of it? Was he saying we should go back to the Dark Ages or something?
No, not at all. Adorno was a really complex thinker, and his critique of the Enlightenment was nuanced and multifaceted. He wasn't rejecting reason altogether, but he was concerned about how reason, when taken too far, could become a tool for domination and control.
Wait, how is that even possible? I thought reason was supposed to be the key to liberation.
That's the paradox Adorno was wrestling with. He argued that the Enlightenment, in its pursuit of objective truth and universal laws, often overlooked the importance of individuality, subjectivity, and the messy reality of human experience.
So by trying to make sense of the world, the Enlightenment actually ended up creating new systems of control.
That was his argument. He believed that the Enlightenment, while it freed us from superstition and dogma, also paved the way for the kind of instrumental rationality that led to some of the worst things that happened in the 20th century.
This is getting really interesting. So you're saying that the Enlightenment, despite its good intentions, might have actually contributed to things like fascism and totalitarianism.
Exactly. Adorno was keenly aware of how even the best ideas could be twisted and used for bad purposes. He wasn't just condemning the Enlightenment, he was pointing out how it could go wrong.
Okay, this makes sense. It's kind of like what we were talking about with the dialectic of enlightenment. How even progress can have these unintended negative consequences.
Got it. And this is why Adorno's work is so crucial, even today. It makes us question those narratives of progress, to be wary of easy answers and those big overarching theories, and to be aware of how manipulation can happen, even in systems that claim to be based on reason and objectivity.
I can see how these ideas would be really valuable for someone trying to understand how power works in the world.
Right.
It's not always about brute force or obvious coercion. It can be much more subtle and sneaky.
Right. And Adorno's critique of the Enlightenment is really just one piece of the puzzle. To see the whole picture, we need to look at his analysis of capitalism, which he saw as totally tied up with all these ideas of manipulation and control.
Okay, capitalism, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go there. But first, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into Adorno's critique of capitalism and see how it relates to the culture industry and everything we've been talking about. All right, so we've been exploring Adorno's ideas about the culture industry, negative dialectics, and even his critique of the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
But now I think it's time to tackle one of the big ones, capitalism.
You're right. You can't talk about Adorno without talking about his critique of capitalism. It was a system he saw as totally bound up in those themes of manipulation and control that we've been talking about.
Now, Adorno was a Marxist, right?
Yeah.
So it's not really a surprise that he wasn't a huge fan of capitalism, but it sounds like his critique went deeper than just the usual arguments about economic exploitation.
Exactly. Adorno's analysis went way beyond the purely economic. He was really interested in how capitalism, especially in its later stages, shapes our culture, our values, even our identities.
So it's not just about the money. It's about the whole way of life that capitalism promotes.
Right. Adorno argued that capitalism, with its focus on consumption and competition, creates a society where our worth is measured by what we own, what we buy, and how we appear to others.
It's like that saying, you are what you buy.
Yeah. And Adorno saw this as incredibly dehumanizing. He believed that capitalism reduces us to consumers constantly striving for more, never really satisfied and always vulnerable to the manipulations of advertising and marketing.
So we're on this endless treadmill of consumption, chasing after happiness that's always just out of reach.
That's exactly the trap Adorno was warning us about. He believed that true happiness comes from something much deeper, something more meaningful than just buying stuff.
And I see how this connects back to his idea of authenticity. True authenticity isn't something you can find in a shopping mall or on Instagram, where it's about resisting that consumerist mindset and finding meaning in something more substantial.
Absolutely. And this is where Adorno's critique of the culture industry becomes even more important. He saw the culture industry as the propaganda machine of capitalism, constantly feeding us messages that reinforce that consumerist mindset and keep us distracted from the real issues.
We talked about the culture industry earlier, but let's bring it back in the context of capitalism. How does all of this play out in the 21st century? It seems like the culture industry is even more powerful now than it was in Adorno's time.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think about it. Social media, the 24/7 news cycle, the constant stream of ads that follows us everywhere. Adorno's idea of the culture industry has never been more relevant.
So how do we resist all of this? How do we even begin to challenge a system that's so deeply ingrained in our culture, our economy, our entire way of life?
Well, Adorno wasn't big on offering easy solutions. He thought the first step is awareness. Understanding how the system works and how it manipulates us.
So it's about educating ourselves, becoming critical consumers of information, questioning the messages we're bombarded with every day.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that real change can't just come from buying different products or adopting different lifestyles. It requires a much deeper shift in consciousness, a rejection of the consumerist mindset that capitalism promotes.
This has been a pretty intense but really insightful conversation. Adorno's work definitely makes you think.
That's what makes him such an important figure. His work pushes us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface of Adorno's thought. There's so much more to explore.
Yeah, that's what's so great about Adorno's work. It's a journey, not a destination. The more you dig into it, the more you realize there is to discover.
And for our listeners who want to keep exploring, I highly recommend checking out some of Adorno's key works. Dialectic of Enlightenment and Minima Moralia are great places to start. You can find them on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. They're challenging reads, but they're worth the effort.
I totally agree. Adorno's work might not always be easy to read, but it offers a really profound and insightful critique of the world. A critique that's just as relevant today as it was back then.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought from Adorno to ponder. Wrong life cannot be lived rightly. Think about it. And we'll catch you at our next deep dive.